Faraway Wanderers, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 13. Exposed. Ch13 abruptly stopped walking and sized up the 4 cave entrances with a frown. "There's water and wind in here, the chances for someone to poison us are low," he said. He wouldn't call himself an expert in medicine-related matters, but the current emperor during his years as crown prince used to be acquainted with a young shaman from South Xinjiang who was held hostage at the capital. The shaman was following orders from the Shaman Valley to use the pugilist scene in Zhongyuan as test subject for their medicine, and most of the South Xinjiang originated remedies and poisons which were unheard of at that time were brought here by him. Ch13 might not possess an intensive knowledge, but he had seen enough to know that there had yet to exist a poison that could cause hallucination for this long. Wen Kexing nodded. "So someone has used divination to find ways to trap us here. Do you know anything about it?" Ch13 replied calmly, "The stuff's about 3 directions, 8 trigrams, and 6 chis." "You must have studied a lot of things, even this," Wen Kexing said in surprise. Ch13 was nonplussed. "Of course I don't, that's all I know about it." He decided to sit down as walking further was an impossible feat. While leaning back onto the wall, he carelessly let the wound graze the surface. He shivered and slightly grimaced, unable to process the fact that a mere wild beast could agonize him to this state, but such was the life of being seen as a nuisance everywhere he went. When Kexing thought about how he at least knew what 3 directions and 8 trigrams actually was and felt a sense of intellectual superiority, but after he remembered that Ch13 sold himself for 2 silvers, the superiority fell flat. So he sat down beside the injured man, tilting his head to look at the wound, somewhat delighted at the other's misfortune. "Serves you right for treating a monster like a little girl." Ch13 closed his eyes to recuperate, paying no attention to him. When Kexing silently stood up, walked away and returned after a while. Ch13 felt a spike of coldness on his shoulder, and he opened his eyes to Wen Kexing using a soaked piece of cloth to wash the wound. On instinct, Ch13 avoided the touch, but Wen Kexing held back his shoulder. "Don't move." Ch13 asked with a pained face, "Where did you get the water from?" "The river." Wen Kexing replied. After some thinking, he added, "It's running water, really clean." Ch13 felt his hair stand on end. He knew it was running water, so drinking from it was no problem, much less using it to treat injuries, but he couldn't stop thinking about those underwater creatures roaming around under there. Sharp-eyed Wen Kexing happily teased the other after noticing the goosebumps, "Can you really be disgusted when you look like a ragged beggar yourself? Come on, stop acting like a maiden." Ch13 knew the other had a point. Nevertheless, he glanced at the other's handkerchief witheringly. The fragrance from it, a gentle and elegant smell of beauty products, attacked his nostrils, and at the corner was a small but exquisitely embroidered orchid. The size was a bit too big and it looked too plain for a maiden to use, but if this was a man's, what kind of person would carry this on them? He couldn't help but give Wen Kexing a weird look and teased the man back since no one was around. "My good friend, why are you carrying a maiden's belongings? Is there a story behind this?" Wen Kexing, who was carefully removing the blood-stained fabric from the open wound, immediately tore the clothes with more force after hearing that, face blank. Ch13 let out an ow, grimacing. Only then did Wen Kexing answered in good spirits, "This is a personal gift from the famous courtesan and gentleman Suyu from Yangzhou City. You shouldn't have asked if you don't want to make an ignorant fool of yourself." Then he continued to tear Suyu's gift into pieces and used them to cover Josishu's wound. Josishu had no idea people from Jiangnan were that open-minded. He asked without thinking, because even back when the capital was 30 miles from the Huangyu River and was ruled by that degenerate emperor, the concept of a male courtesan was not heard of anywhere. When Kexing looked at him with pity, "Were you born in Utopia? Is everyone from Tianchuang a country bumpkin? Or was my guess wrong?" Josishu scoffed, "Never have I said that I." Before he could finish, Wen Kexing moved at lightning speed to dig at a major acupuncture point on his chest. If the target was at another place on his body and was covered by clothes, Josishu would not feel anything, but he was exhausted and the unruly nails were acting up, so that very light attack was the last straw. He cried out, body bent over in pain, "You." When Kexing rubbed his chin, his tone knowing, "Your internal injuries are very serious, and seeing how capable you are, there's no way Tianchuang will let you go easily. But from what I heard, the deadly reputation of the nails of 7 apertures for 3 autumns is no jokes, yet I see that you can still behave normally and run around in great spirits. Even if you act a little silly, that silliness definitely isn't caused by the nails. Did I really guess wrong after all?" Josishu gritted out while sweating buckets, "When Kexing, screw your entire ancestors." Seeing that the man stopped putting on an act with all of his blah 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 brother when whatever nonsense, Wen Kexing felt accomplished even though he just got cursed at. He replied nonchalantly, "My ancestors are just dust now, I don't even know their names, so that might be an impossible feat though, if you can remove your disguise, and under that is a stunning face, I'm perfectly willing to be a replacement for my forebears." Josishu was still gritting his teeth tightly, body wound up like a shrimp and trying his best to keep the nails under control. At the other's ramblings, he interrupted in irritation, "Would you shut the fuck up?" When Kexing shut up immediately, crossing his arms and watching by the side with not a single ounce of guilt. After an undecipherable amount of time, Josishu opened his bloodshot eyes. Even though outsiders could not see what his real expression was, it was clearly not pleasant. "It's morning now." The nails had calmed down, which signified dawn. They had been trapped in this strange cave for an entire night. When Kexing was not anxious either. He nodded at that, "Seems like whoever lured you here possibly on purpose really wants you dead." "Whoever lured you?" Josishu replied. "It's obviously you, I'm a good person." When Kexing wouldn't admit defeat. Josishu ignored him, grasping at the wall to stand up. He leaned on it and started calculating the way to escape. When Kexing asked by his side, "Aren't you afraid, Josu?" "I am," Josishu replied. When Kexing stared at him, slightly surprised. Josishu continued very seriously, "I haven't gathered enough merits yet. If I enter hell now, who knows what I'll reincarnate into." When Kexing firmly said after some thought, "You definitely weren't a good person before, then." He didn't wait for Josishu's reply, "If that's the case, isn't it too late to start merit gathering now?" Josishu straightened his back and walked toward a direction. "Why? Haven't you heard of the saying, the second you drop the knife is when you become Buddha?" When Kexing chased after him, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to eat dog meat," Josishu said, "that person only traps us here." "Traps you?" When Kexing corrected. Josishu glanced at him with contempt, continuing, "That beast's head is quite hefty, feasting on that is enough for us to last a few days. Without it there are still the underwater creatures, so we definitely won't starve. Doesn't matter who that person dressed in black is, they'll show themselves eventually." When Kexing said in horror, You were afraid of the dirty river water just yesterday, and now you want to eat those things that live in it. And are you going to starve yourself to death and let those things eat you instead? Wuxia replied and concluded, "How saintly of you, brother Wen." The light couldn't reach the cave, but fortunately Wuxia brought with him some lighters since he planned on escaping in the night. There was also a luminous pearl that he stole from the riches. The pearl was small but it was enough for them to move around. The faint light cast over half of his face, and Wen Kexing saw not the unpleasant features, but very bright eyes that were directed at him, carrying an indescribable hint of playfulness. That look was somewhat familiar. Wen Kexing thought long and hard about it, but he couldn't remember which beauty those eyes belonged to, so he stayed silent. In the moment when both of them said nothing, Wuxia's ears caught the sound of a breath that was neither his nor Wen Kexing's. He smiled as expected. Someone was not feeling very patient right now. He then stood by the river and bent down to wash his hands, killing another monster that was sneakily attacking in the process. He lifted it up and threw it on the ground. The creature's neck broke and it drew its last breath without even making a sound. Wuxia scooped up the water and drank leisurely. Wen Kexing, a carefree hoodlum himself, stared at his companion thoughtfully before using the tip of his toe to kick the corpse away and drank the river water like the other. At that moment, a blade of wind came at them from behind. Wen Kexing dodged it by stepping aside, seemingly predicted it as he looked calm. A blade grazed his robes and fell into the water with a splash. Wuxia laughed, his arms crossed as he stood to one side to enjoy the fun. "See, brother Wen, didn't I say that they're after you? And you're definitely not the good type either, seeing that they devote this much effort to deal with you." There were blades coming at him from every direction of the cave. Those blades completely went past Wuxia to charge at Wen Kexing, creating a maze of weapons, but Wen Kexing didn't struggle at all, his Qinggong so much more skillful than Wuxia had estimated. Internally, though, he was cursing this Zhou person was such a vengeful and petty one. Not only was he not good, he was utterly contemptible. Wen Kexing lifted his arm to bat away another blade, which brushed Wuxia's pants and planted itself on the ground. Is leaving one to sink or swim your way of gathering merits, my beautiful Zhou? End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.